All right. Thank you all for having me.
Where the fans at? Where the fans at? Give me one time. Oh, 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 I got my boots on the ground.
All right, all right, all right. Thank you all. I thought I would start this in an upbeat way. I know that I'm dating myself a little bit because if you know this song, you're probably middle-aged like me, and you have seen people dancing to it and all of that kind of thing. And if you're not, you probably are like, what is that song all about? But the reason why I wanted to start that way, again, I'm Leslie Davis, and I'm glad to be here, is that the question, where is all the fans? Where did all the fans go? Where are them fans at? What do I mean by that? Well, in the song, they mean actual fans and they're dancing. But I mean the people who are actual fans of DEI, the people who recognize and know that having diversity of perspectives and thought processes and all of that really is where it's at in order to do the best for your client, to have the best communication, to do what's best for any particular organization. Where did all those fans go, right? And so I wanted to start with, where are we? Where are we at? What is the status of what's going on right now? Well, so to know where we are, it's I think a little important to know where we came from. So when I started at NAMWOLF, 4 years ago, George Floyd had just happened. George Floyd's death was, a real wake-up call for many people who were shocked and it just totally beside themselves about how somebody could literally just be snuffed out in front of everybody for apparently no real good reason. And so because of that, you had lots of corporations and organizations and even the federal government and everybody saying, we got to do better, we got to do more. And so many, many dollars, 200 billion to be exact, was pledged to make sure that there were avenues to ensure that racial justice was happening and initiatives were going forward that were going to mean that everybody had some more equity and equality and all those things. And so it was a good time. It was a tragic situation, but it was a kind of a call to arms for many people who hadn't been thinking about DEI in a specific way and had been just thinking that everything was okay, and they were kind of woke up to a certain extent. And so that's what happened. And so you had lots of hands on deck, and people were out of the gray area, and they decided that they wanted to be on the front lines and be on the team. Coach, put me in. That's what was happening. And so we enjoyed that for some time. And then here came the college admissions case. Well, and that case was one where it really kind of started the cycle of, how are we really looking at DEI? Are there some differences? Are there some changes that we want to make? And so that case was one that was the first kind of turn where the justices said, well, we're thinking that, maybe we should not let race play a factor in some of the admissions processes, and that is problematic. And then you saw those try to take that court case and that admissions case and try to blanket move it into other areas. And so that was an attempt to kind of take that one thing and put a blanket over many of the things that were happening in corporations and other areas, which it wasn't designed for that, but you saw people trying to move in that way. And then what happened? You had an election. Well, regardless of whatever side you were on in the election, it was clear that it was polarizing, because for the first time you had an African American woman in a race, and you had deep divides about what people believed in terms of gender and race, and even the peaceful transition of power, whether it was a flat out insurrection and an attempt to overthrow the government, or whether it was just a group of people who were unhappy about what they thought to be a stolen election. However you saw it, it happened, and it was deeply dividing to our country. And then and then the election happened where then President Trump was elected. And so I took it out of order a little bit. It was the insurrection, then it was the election. And then here you go, the executive orders. And so there was a lot of things that happened along the way from George Floyd till now, from 2020 to now we sit in 2025. So the last 5 years have been a really a conundrum of many things that have happened that have changed the direction of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and has muddied the waters in big ways that have affected many people. And while I'm going to just be talking about DE and I today, obviously there are all kinds of other changes that have happened recently that have affected many, many people across the board as it relates to the shutting down of different governmental agencies and all of that. That is, not to be given short shrift, because that is happening in very, very real ways for a lot of people. We're focusing on DE and I today, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about all the different cuts and things to veterans and to those the elderly and all those kinds of things. But we don't have enough time today to go through everything, so we're going to focus on DE and I. All right. So we ask ourselves, okay, how do we get there? That's how we got there. Where do fans go? I don't know. They are not necessarily where they were before, but the good news is we are the boots on the ground. We are the boots on the ground. Where the fans go, they're gone, but we are still here. And who is the we? Well, it's all of us. It's all of you. It's every one of us who understands the value of really equity and equality for everyone. And so when I say we are the boots on the ground, that's really to have another call to action for those of us who recognize that the cavalry is not coming, that it's really going to mean that we have to stand up and do what we know to do in order to advance our profession, advance the careers of ourselves and those around us, and to make sure that any of the false narratives that are coming through are just dampened, that they are snuffed out. Because as lawyers and as people who are supposed to be really thoughtful about the rule of law and the way in which we move, we've got to really be really thoughtful about what that really looks like and how we are moving in this particular atmosphere so that we can really have an effect. So when you say boots on the ground, I really mean literally, we are the ones who have to do this. So that means we've got to show up in meaningful ways. And so I don't like to do any kind of presentation where I talk about everybody else and I'm pointing the finger at what everybody else is doing and not talking about what we are doing, what we should be doing, what I should be doing, what you should be doing, the individuals, because that's when it's all said and done. That is how we're going to move forward when we are working together collectively. And so what does that mean? That means we have to think about our own unconscious bias and microaggression and what that looks like. And so I like to talk, and I'm going to talk just about it a little bit here about what is that, right? We started with talking about DE&I, but really, how do we get there? Why do we even have to still be talking about this, right? Because we all have unconscious bias. We all have those blind spots where if we're not thoughtful about them, they show up and they make us move and act in ways that are not helpful for our goals. And so I thought it'd be important for us to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So before we talk about the roadmap to how we can move past that, we've got to know where we're at. And so I bring these up because these are just some of the things I like to talk about because they're just so obvious, but there's all kinds of other unconscious bias and microaggression. Unconscious bias is different than conscious bias, right? There are those who have decided that they do not want any diversity efforts to move forward. They are not interested in what's happening with women or LGBTQ or folks with disabilities or any of that. They just want things to move in just a very narrow way. And so those folks have conscious bias. We're not talking about them. I don't really know what to do with them because in some respects, they don't want to get knowledge. They don't want to be different. But for everybody else, and I include me in this category, there's unconscious bias. There are ways in which you think and you show up that you might just not be realizing that it's bias because it's the way you were brought up, or it's just the way that you've been led to think and you don't even know where it comes from. I can give you some examples of that. And so it can be in the workplace, it can be at home, it can just be kind of everywhere. I like to give a few examples that are funny but true. When my son, who's now 21, was little, probably 5 or 6, I was reading the newspaper, and he said to me, "Oh, mommy, put daddy's newspaper down. Um, Girls don't read the newspaper. Girls read People magazine." And I laughed and I said, "Where'd you get that from?" He said, "Well, because I see Daddy reading the paper and I see you reading People magazine." I said, "But I read the paper too. I mean, I like People magazine, but I read the paper too." And he had just already decided from what he had seen, I guess what he had observed, what he thought, that that was the way it was going to be. And so just imagine, me being his mother, I right away was trying to disavow him of that, but it was just thoughts that he had based upon what he saw. And that was something that had started to percolate in him that was catching root. And so, yes, I tried to snuff that out and say that's not true, but it had already come to his mind, even though he lives in a household that is definitely, trying to make sure that we are not perpetuating those kind of stereotypes. But it happens in the workplace too. He speak. I'm sure many of you have seen that. When a woman says something, everybody looks a little confused. But then a man might say the exact same thing, and next thing you know, it's like, oh, eureka! Everybody understands. It's so clear. And sometimes that's just a matter of the fact that we are often used to hearing men give information, or you might have been in a situation where you've always had male bosses. And so when a man says something, your natural inclination is to hear it in a different way than when a woman says something. Doesn't mean that what she said wasn't absolutely valid and true and perfect. It just means you didn't hear it the same way because of the way in which you've been socialized. That happens all the time. And we see that in all these other things, in incumbency bias, as law firm business generators. Oftentimes it's difficult to get beyond folks using the folks who they've always used over and over again to add value to their ranks, right? They want to keep using the same folks because if the other people who they're using have been doing a good job, they don't see a reason to change, or they don't see a reason to add. But we know that there's always a need to make sure that you are giving some credence to, some voice to additional information, additional value adds. And that means that you have to look at it each and every time. And then affinity. Affinity. We all have affinity. People like what they like, right? I have an affinity to work with people who get the job done, who are fast movers, who are fast thinkers, who move in a certain way. And I have to check myself sometimes to say, wait a minute, there is a need sometimes to slow down, to think more specifically about something before you move on to the next thing. And so we all have to be thoughtful about whether our affinity is truly just an affinity or if it's a bias, because affinity and bias are kissing cousins. You will look up, and next thing you know, your affinity will have turned into a bias. Not because you were intending it to, but because you along the way have decided, I only like to deal with these certain people. I only like to deal with folks who came from my university. I only like people who show up like I show up, look how I look, talk like I talk, think how I think. And so we all have to be careful. And that's why I put many of these on the slide here, just to know that, we have to be thoughtful about how we're showing up, because it's not just everybody else. We have unconscious bias too. And when that unconscious bias shows up, then it's the way that you act is the microaggression. The way you think is the unconscious bias, but it's the way you act, which is the microaggression. It's the way that it shows up. And I just want to put a finer point on that before I move on, is you might think that you've got your unconscious bias under control. You might have identified what it is. You know kind of where your affinity and your biases lie. and you think you're good with that, and you think that other people don't see it and other people don't know. But I challenge you on that because it will show up in ways that you might not even be knowledgeable about or you might not even know. And I give you this example because during the pandemic, I do a presentation, not this one, but another one. I do a presentation where I talk about microaggression and unconscious bias. My kids have heard it probably hundreds of times at this point. And so my daughter said to me at one point, she's talking to me, she had to be about 16 at the time. She's talking to me and I'm listening. And she said, that right there, that thing you're doing. I said, what are you talking about? She said, it's kind of that way your eyes are kind of looking and your head is kind of moving and kind of the way you're just showing up for me right now. I can tell that you're not really interested in what I'm saying because you think you already know, you've already been there, you already know how this is going to turn out. And that's a unconscious bias. And that's a microaggression. And I I had to say to myself, well, here's the truth, and I'll tell you this little secret. I really wasn't interested in what her 16-year-old self was telling me about some particular issue with some friend or whatever, which I did know how it was going to turn out. I read that book. I lived that book. I know how that book ends. But I love my daughter completely. I absolutely care about what she's thinking about and what she's talking about and what ultimately is going to happen with her. But in that moment, that unconscious bias about, kind of busy, not really caring about what a 16-year-old is talking about with her friends, that came through, even with somebody whom I love. So if you think it's not coming through with folks who you just work with, you're wrong. They see it too. If there's something about, how you feel about them, what they're talking about, their input, the way they show up. If you think it's not coming through, that's not true because it's in our body language. It's in the way we look. It's in the way we move. It's in the hand gestures and the head nods. What is in the heart will flow through. And so that is why I spent a little time talking about where are you at? Before we move on to where everybody else is, where are you at? Where do you need to be? Where do we need to be as folks who care and how we show up with everybody else? And so once you have acknowledged what your unconscious bias is and try to get that under control, what do we do? Well, the best practices roadmap. Well, that's what, is exciting about this, right? Because we know that there are things we can do, right? So we know where we're at and how we got here. We know that there are things we're still working on internally, both with ourselves and in our organizations. But then now, the beautiful part about being at NAMWOLF is that I really do get an opportunity to hear from a lot of people, see what a lot of organizations are doing, see what a lot of law firms are doing, see what a lot of individual lawyers are doing. And that's one of the things I love most about this job is that while I don't have all the answers, I wish I did, but I don't. I do have the ability, excuse me, to see what a lot of people are doing. And that I like to share. And so some of the things that I think are the best practices for how we can continue to move forward, even in a culture and an environment that's trying to hold us back right now, is we can do some of these things. This is by no means the only checklist, but these are the things that we are currently doing at NAMWOLF and currently what I am doing to try to ensure that we're moving ahead in just the same ways that we would be doing no matter who was in office. Working with like-minded organizations, yes, just like working with NCWBA, we're working with other organizations. What do I mean by that? Well, with some of them, we are doing activities or we're doing CLEs with. Some of them we're just having meetings to talk about what they're doing and what we should be doing. And then some of them we are introducing our different networks to one another so that we can make sure that there are numbers moving ahead and we all know about each other. There's not just one way to work together. There's all kinds of ways you can work together. DRI, we work with them. We actually rent space from DRI, so we're with them every day. And now we're going to be doing something with them in June. And so the whole idea is that when you are putting your resources and your thought processes, your talent, your creative energies together with other folks who want to move in a specific direction, you can really make an impact. And so, in addition to that, you are building coalitions. There are groups who have come together who call themselves coalitions, who really are coming together to think about who can do the advocacy piece, who are the folks who can file briefs and lawsuits. So you've got folks like WeBank and NMSDC, the ACLU, and others who are on the front line, who are trying to make sure that there are not rollbacks to really the rule of law, to things that we thought were foregone conclusions, like just due process and things like that. So regardless of how you feel about individual rulings, things like due process and transition of power and all of those things are things that many people can rally around, because we want to make sure there's order and decency in our legal system, and that there's not just one person making all of the decisions for everybody. And so the coalitions are doing that. So those are another great way. Expanding your own DEI IQ is one thing. We talked a little bit about that just a minute ago, but beyond that, it's really having those intergenerational relationships. I think that matters more now than ever. It's not just the kind of the older generation reaching back and showing them the way. We've got to make sure that we are hearing and listening to some of what they have to offer, some of the creative ideas they have, and the ways in which they view the world that we might view it differently, because those are the folks who will be voting. Those are the folks who will be taking over for us. And so it's not the same as it used to be, where it was just generationally handed down. I think those intergenerational kinds of communications are really important now, because let's face it, they know more than they used to know, because there's more tools and there's more access. So they get to, at a very early age, get to understand more about everything, not just the law, but all the things that are going on in the world and in the communities. And so they more early have interest in certain things and have ideas about certain things, and are not willing to just blindly follow, when we say, we know, we've got the experience, just listen to me. That's getting harder and harder to have that kind of an impact. So, expanding who you listen to, your podcast, the folks who you listen to. I have had to challenge myself, because I tend to listen to all the folks who think like I think and say what I like to hear. And I find it a little bit agitating or frustrating to listen to other point of views that are so staunchly different than what I believe. But I do make myself listen here and there, because I recognize that if I'm in a vacuum and I'm only listening to the things that make me feel good, then I'm not growing. I don't have a bigger view. I don't have a full perspective. And so I stretch myself in ways too. And that's sometimes hard, especially if it's really radical to what you believe. But I listen. It doesn't mean that I change my belief per se, but it gives me a broader understanding of how people can feel differently. And that can even happen even within your own family. I have young people in my family who, when it was time to vote, I have some young men in my family who were really very conflicted about the whole process, and how much, they felt they had been ostracized from anybody caring about them, until now people want their vote. And it's like, oh, I want you to do this. And so we had lots of dialogue, and I thought they understood that there were people who had died for the right to vote and all these things. And that just fell hollow with them. They really felt like, but what about now? They were more concerned about, what about now? How do I feel now? And so those are the kinds of things we learn when we try to expand our own DEI IQ. And so I encourage everybody to do that. It's not easy, but do it. The transparent conversations with stakeholders, that's really important. I've been doing more of that, lately than I ever have had to do. Why? Because before, everybody seemed to be, on, kind of clear about the benefits to having diversity of perspective and what that looked like, and feel good about that. But now I'm having conversations where companies and others, they recognize it, they believe in it, but they're worried about having a target on their back. They don't want to be the one who's waving the flag or their logo plastered everywhere, because they don't really have the time or the money to really fight those battles that they don't want to fight. They just want to continue to do the good work that they were doing, support who they support, and they want to be on those target front lines. And so I respect that. And so you've got to let them know, hey, we get it. We're not going to be trying to put that target on your back. We recognize you got to move in a different way and that you've got to be a little bit maybe more selective or intentional in what you're doing. And we're right there with you. So having those transparent conversations really can be helpful, not in just the DEI practices, but just in fortifying those relationships that we all need to keep in order to, do well in our business. The self-sanity strategies. I wish I had a lot of those to give you, and I'm still trying to figure them out. All I know is that they are important, that you have to have some. And so some of the ones that I have and that others I've talked to have in terms of trying to battle this overwhelm is really to break it down, lessen the number of inputs. When I work from home, it used to be that I would have the news running in the background. It would be watching me work and I'd be listening to it and just over and over and over again, like almost like white noise. Not anymore. Because it's just frustrating to continue to hear some of the rhetoric and some of the, negativity and that. And so I had to stop some of that, all of those inputs coming in all the same. So now I decide when I want those inputs and when I'm ready to hear certain things. And so that's one of the ways that I have tried to keep my sanity, by having bite-sized pieces of it, right? We have a whole team at NAMWOLF. You all have a whole collective organization. One person doesn't have to do everything. One person doesn't have to figure it all out. We've broken it down into bite-sized pieces. This group think about this. This group think about that. You think about this. I'll think about that. And then we'll come together and figure out how we can move forward. Because for any one person, it can be overwhelming, and it's meant to be overwhelming. That's why it seems like it's coming rapid fire, because then you can't do anything. You're just paralyzed, right? And so breaking it down to bite-sized pieces and find your center. What's your center? How do you get centered? Well, for you, it could be anything. It could be, walking. It could be reading. It could be doing whatever makes you happy. For me, mine is a spiritual center. When, I shouldn't say when all else fails, because my grandmother would say you should start there. But truthfully, when I feel myself getting into a place where I just can't take it anymore, I just rely on what I know works. And that is my spiritual center. That is God. And that is recognizing also that I'm not the first. I'm not the first person to have to go through this. We have, we're standing on big shoulders of women and other ancestors who have done it, who have been there, and who have succeeded. And so we can too. And the other thing I want to show you, which is my new thing that I love, is what is this? Lego flowers. These have saved my life. I just veg out. I get my Legos and I just start doing them. And next thing I know, I have a beautiful thing to show and my mind is tranquil. And so my kids are laughing at me. They are like, what is going on? Why have you taken to Legos? I did not know that it would be a way to keep my sanity, but it is. So I share that with you. That's one of my SSSs that I'm happy to share with you. And I hope that some of that resonates with you as much as it has with me. All right. So
Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype.
all right. I'm aging myself again. That's from 1988 when I was starting college. That was a very popular song. Talk about intergenerational stuff. Don't believe the hype. That's what I really mean. Don't believe the hype. There is so much hype out there about what diversity is and is not. And it's very simple. Diversity does not mean hiring folks who are less qualified. In fact, it's the opposite, because many times women and diverse lawyers and others have had to do more, be better, strive harder, go farther in order to get to the same place that some of their counterparts are. And so that's why that is just an oxymoron. It's just not true, right? I can tell you in the whole time I've been at NAMWOLF, I've never had somebody call and say, just send me a woman. I don't care what they do. Just send me a woman. Just send me somebody Black. Just send me somebody gay. Never happened. They always want to know what the bona fides are, how, what their expertise is, what value add, why they should be thought of in this way, what to expect, and all the other things that anybody has to be asked as relates to hiring somebody. It has never been just enough to just be, right? And so that's just false. It does not mean that you are excluding white men. I love to do these kinds of presentations when there are white men in the room, because this is the point when I say to them, I'm talking to you. This means you. I know you think that this has nothing to do with you and that we're excluding you. To the contrary, your voice matters. I want to hear your voice too. When we say we're including all voices, that means theirs too. They have something to add. They have a perspective that is valuable as well. They have something that is unique to what their experiences have been. The only difference is that their voice is not more important than other voices. It's just as important. And that's the thing that everybody needs to understand. Now, if you're them and your voice has been more important than everybody's voice for a very long time, maybe you don't feel good about everybody having a voice and you would prefer your voice be the louder and be the one that is the most important. That's all we're saying, is that that's not fair, that everybody's voice matters. Theirs too. We're not excluding them. We are including them in an equal way. And so I love to have that conversation with white men in the room, because I just want to be clear. That's what we all mean when we say including everybody. It's not meant to promote any group over another. It's meant to promote equality. And so, yes, that may mean that sometimes, in order to get everybody to the same point, you may have to focus on groups that have been marginalized. So that could be women, that could be minorities or LGBTQ or others who for a long time have not been given the same opportunities. You may have to pay attention and be intentional to make sure that they are brought up in the same way so we can be at an equal playing ground. And so again, that's what it's meant to do. It's not meant to do anything else. So all of the other things, all the talk about it being illegal and that, is really just meant to dissuade people from being thoughtful about what equality really looks like. Okay. So we know that having racial and gender equality leads to better outcomes. This slide just tells you that point blank. We do the research. We look to see what the outcomes are. And we know that teams that are more diverse are more innovative. They have better financial returns. The revenue is higher. We even know when we're talking about, diversity within law firms, that things work out better. Numbers fare better. That's just facts. But it's because it's math. You will never hear me say anything about doing it because it's the right thing to do. I don't believe people are motivated by doing what's right per se. I want to lose a few pounds. I had a donut this morning. That was not the right thing to do. My motivation was comfort. It's what I wanted. It's what I like. It's what I know. It's what was available. The list goes on. So when you talk about diversity, we need to talk about the math of it, because the math is clear. When you bring together more viewpoints, upbringings, religious backgrounds, ways of viewing the universe, educational backgrounds, the list goes on, you exponentially increase the possible outcomes for any problem. As lawyers, that's what we do. We are expert problem solvers. So in order to get the largest possible pool of potential solutions, you have to exponentially increase all the different perspectives that come with that. That's just the math of it. It's not because it's the right thing to do, it's because it's the mathematical thing to do. And I love talking about it as it relates to math, because math is undisputable, right? And so let's think about it in terms of math. We know the math works. All right. Lastly, coming around the bend here, want to make sure that you understand the impact that NAMWOLF has had. I'm very proud to be the leader of NAMWOLF. We have a group of individuals who are really committed to ensuring that, just like we're talking about here today, that we are building coalitions, we are working with other groups, that we are being thoughtful about how we're showing up, and our law firms are that same way. We are all stronger together. I love this slide because it shows the breadth of NAMWOLF, but truly there are NAMWOLF lawyers that are part of all kinds of other organizations, including NCWBA. And so we are all stronger together. This just shows you the map of where NAMWOLF law firms are. But if you think of this as a map that really shows you the strength in numbers of where you have, diverse law firms who also are part of other organizations, who are also part of other organizations, we really can make an impact. This really shows you how strong we are together. And I love showing this map for that reason. And then lastly, where do we go from here? What does the future look like? Well, I wish I had a crystal ball and I could tell you for sure exactly how we're going to get to that promised land, how we're going to ensure that all the rollbacks and things that are happening don't impact us in ways that are irreversible. I can't tell you exactly what that looks like, but this is what I can tell you. I can tell you that we will get there, we will succeed. Leslie, how do you know that? Well, for one, we've done it before. Yes, these are trying times. Yes, it is sad and makes me very unhappy. But the truth of the matter is, we have women and others, minorities and other people who have done it before. They have successfully stood up for each other and stemmed the tide and moved forward with adversity. And some of the adversity was much more than what we are facing. Folks got lynched. Folks, went through all kinds of things that really persecution, and they made it to the other side. And so we just have to make sure that we keep doing what we know to be the right thing, not because we believe it to be morally right, but the right thing meaning that we are working together. We are standing together. We are being thoughtful. We are cross-marketing. We are dispelling myths. We are doing all the things that we know will get us to where we want to do, all the right things that lead in a direction, and make sure that we are not fighting against one another. That we recognize there is room at the top for all of us and that we need to help each other get there. And so regardless of whether yours is more of a gender equity issue or minority issue, or there's other things that are going on as it relates to, wars and religious persecution and all these kinds of things, we are in it together and we can make it successfully down this road together. So thank you all for having me. I am happy to take questions from you now. And thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving me this time with you this afternoon.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. If anyone has any questions, throw them in the Q&A, please.
I can't believe this group is this quiet. Nobody have any questions?
What do you, I'll throw one out there. What do you say to those companies who are facing this right now, right? Where they are being told, look, your funding is going away if you keep this. And of course, it's a reward and risk analysis, but their culture has been, yay, DEI, and this is the right thing, and we should do this, but we're at risk of losing money. What do you tell them?
So I'm talking to them every day. And what I'm saying to them is, look, yes, if you were just hiring people willy-nilly because they were diverse, then yes, you should stop that if that's what you were doing. I don't actually happen to know any companies that were doing that. What companies were doing was that they were looking at the value add that other law firms could bring, i.e., many times, women-owned and minority-owned law firms, they're much smaller. So they have a different set of skills, right? They're not full service. Whatever they do just as good or better than anybody else, but they don't stretch to do everything. So they might have a particular expertise that the other firms they were dealing with do not have. They probably have flexibility in rates. That doesn't mean that the firms are cheap per se, but when you start looking at larger law firms that have, billable hours at the $1,000 mark, sure, many of our firms are less than that. And so when you're looking at value add and flexibility and expertise, there's nothing about any of these executive orders or anything else that has come down that has made it so that you can't in a business way be thoughtful about that for your own company. There's nothing that precludes you from doing that. And so they should be thoughtful about why they're looking at the firms and the reasons, and those were always the reasons. So they should not shy away from looking at firms that are value adds because of their expertise and because of the value proposition. That's what people do when they hire firms. And so obviously it's easy for me to say that, I'm not in those companies, but to me, that's really a very simple proposition. Some people will use this as an off ramp. Some people who weren't really that keen on doing it anyway will use this as a way to say, oh, we can't do it. But I think those who were really being thoughtful in the first instance about what they were doing can find ways to continue to do it and probably just be a little bit more intentional about the language they're using. Even we're being more intentional about the language we're using, because I am rah-rah diversity, because I know that it matters and it adds value. But I'm talking a little bit more about, yes, there's diversity, but look at all these other bona fides that make these firms fantastic. So start there. Maybe I'm not starting with the diversity, but I'm certainly not, I'm very proud of it, but I'm starting with all the other things that come before that have nothing to do with that still makes them a good reason makes it a good reason to hire them. So that's what I'm saying to them every day, several times a day now. Yes.
We have two other questions. Thank you so much, Leslie. I'm wondering what you're advising clients as it relates to DEI programs at this time. And then we've had women's events hosted by law firms lose funding due to law firms being nervous. Any suggestions on how to push the envelope there, but still hold the events if they're open to allies? Is that enough?
So again, I would say the same thing. If I'm really being, honest, do I think that sometimes in this environment that it's better to have it be open to everybody? Probably. But here's the real truth. It's like any event, right? The folks who you invite are going to be those who care about what you're doing, those who want to be with you, those who were involved previously. So even if you open it up to everybody, which that's fine, you're probably still going to get the folks who care about what you're doing in a more intimate way to show up. And so for us, it doesn't bother me to have to say, okay, we're opening up something to everybody, just for the sake of making it clear. We're not trying to exclude anybody. Yeah, is it a little uncomfortable? Yes, it is. But, we are all in the same boat, and we all have to be moving in ways that are going to allow us to survive. And that's what we're doing right now, is trying to survive and trying to thrive. And so that means pivoting and making adjustments. And as women, we know how to do that probably better than anybody else. And so that's what we're doing. And so, yes, that's what I'm advising people, to be thoughtful about the ways you have to pivot, you have to change, and do that risk analysis. There are some things we are not changing. Some things are core to who we are. It is what it is, right? I mean, I could change my name to Jelly Bean, but if what you really don't like is the core of who Leslie Davis is, she's not changing. So there's not a lot I can do about that. So, but I can change some of the things that might be peripheral, that might mean that I'm still able to move forward in meaningful ways. So we're all doing that dance. And that's really the best advice I can give. Just figure out what the pace is, what the beat is for the dance you're doing with that particular group, and do that. Because we've had to do different things in different ways for different different groups that we're with, and I'm happy to do that. There's some core things we won't change, but it's okay. We can open up some things and do some things differently in order to survive.
Thank you. And what are you seeing as far as affinity groups go, whether organizational affinity groups or law firm affinity groups?
So that's a good question. I am seeing affinity groups go by the wayside, unfortunately. That for many companies, and I've talked to many of them, that for many companies was kind of low-hanging fruit, in the sense that even before any of this was happening, there was already some brouhaha because the groups were getting kind of weirdish. What do I mean by that? So if you had, racial affinity groups, then you had others who wanted to have like kind of other religious affinity groups. And then you wanted to have people who had like things that might be deemed a little like kind of socially unacceptable kind of things, have an affinity group. So I know people in HR and in employment law in companies who were already like, this affinity group stuff is getting kind of out of hand because we can't say yes to one and no to other. If you have the Christian affinity group, you have to have the devil worshiping affinity group. It's like, okay, this is a lot. So that was very easy for some companies to say, you know what? This was already a little bit of a pain for us. We just letting go of all of that. That way we don't have to worry about it. So I've seen affinity groups go by the wayside a lot in corporations, even before this, to be honest. Now it's really going away. In law firms, I'm not so sure. I haven't really, I don't really talk to the large law firms as much. And in our firms in NAMWOLF, they're already diverse. And so there's no affinity groups. They already are an affinity. They have an affinity for what they're doing and moving in diverse ways. So they don't really have affinity groups. So I've seen it more as it relates to companies than I have in law firms.
Thank you. Any last questions before we let everyone go on to their week? Doesn't look like any. Just want to thank you one more time and just say how much we appreciate you being here and also the work that you do, having your boots on the ground, and also creating this network that is doing the same and advising the same and just there to be teammates.
Yes, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I am in awe of the work that you all do, onward and upward. I'm hoping that, any ways in which we can be helpful to you, we're happy to do that. And like I said, continuing to, cross-pollinate and collaborate and all those kinds of things are one way that we can all move ahead. So thank you for having me. Thank you all for, all the work that you all do. It's really important. And I wish you all the best. And have a great rest of your week.